biggest pieces that could be dealt around the NHL draft is Jacob Markstrom of the Calgary Flames. And just recently, we got a big breakdown from Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts talking about Jacob Markstrom's play, which teams could potentially be in on him, and most importantly, what the price on Markstrom is, because it is insane. And I'm going to spoil it just a bit here. It is pricey. But if a Jacob Markstrom trade were to happen, who will be the most likely frontrunners to make it happen, and what will the trade actually look like? Well, today we're going to be breaking down all the trade rumors so you guys can get informed, and hit that subscribe and like button if you guys enjoy and want to see more trade content just like this, because there's going to be a ton coming out. Now, if you guys remember in the draft trades video, we talked about Markstrom potentially being an option for a few teams out there. We specifically talked about New Jersey potentially being in on him, and that has not swayed whatsoever. We know that Markstrom can be one of the premier goalies in this league. He's somebody that this last year was incredibly underrated. Again, keeping Calgary from a much worse position. He was one of their best players consistently. Now, in his time with Calgary, he's a player that's had some ups and downs, but he usually comes back with an even better season. And you can see an .892 save percentage last season, rebounding well to a .905. And in my opinion, if he was on a much better team, he would have been around the .915 range. In terms of goals saved above expected, he was one of the best goalies all year. You got to consider Calgary's weird season this last year and how many subtractions they made to that defense. It made the goaltenders' jobs incredibly difficult, and Markstrom's especially was. But again, I think in a true contender with a better defense around him, we could see Markstrom around a .915, maybe even a .920 save percentage. I still think he has that in him, but there is one problem. It really does come down to the age. Turning 35 this next January, and even though so far he's aged pretty gracefully, nothing is set in stone. And you also consider the cap hit at $6 million for this year and next, and things become a little bit more complicated when you talk about it. And then you factor in the complete no move clause, and you can start to see why he hasn't been moved yet. It feels like there's so many complications in this Jacob Markstrom deal, but it also feels like there's too much momentum for something to not happen this offseason. Again, I think it's a reason why we didn't see something at the trade deadline was because there were too many moving parts. But as Pierre LeBrun mentions, the Flames and Devils are starting to reconnect, trying to make a deal happen. Back in February, the Flames were actually the party that ended up dropping out, not Markstrom. He was ready to go to New Jersey if it ended up happening. And this is especially important. LeBrun says that Markstrom is still willing to waive his no movement clause, but the Devils aren't the only team calling the Flames of interest, and that, especially in the last few days, has been confirmed. We've now seen a ton of other teams that reportedly have been in on the Jacob Markstrom sweepstakes. It's not just New Jersey, who are one of the front runners, but there are more options here for Calgary. Now, we're going to mention the other teams that could be in on Markstrom in a second here, but first I want to talk about today's sponsor in Sleeper and share my picks with Game 2 for you all. We had Game 1. It was an absolutely insane one, but today I'm going to go for 3 different picks. First, I'm going to go Sergei Bobrovsky, more than 24.5 saves. I got Aaron Ekblad, also more than 1.5 blocks, and then Stuart Skinner, less than 26.5 saves. To me, even though we'll see the scales kind of balance out a little bit, and I do think we'll see the Panthers have a rebound game too, maybe even winning it, I still think it's going to be pretty tight, pretty competitive, and a lower shooting affair besides the Oilers, who I still think will get around maybe 25, 30 shots or so. It's a little bit of a simple picks here today, but we'll see how it works. But if you guys want to make your own picks for Game 2, I highly recommend Sleeper by going in the description, signing up and use promo code GRAV there, and you'll get up to an $100 match. It's a great way to get started, and the best time to get started is now with Sleeper Fantasy. Still, though, we had Elliot Friedman talking about the situation recently about New Jersey and Calgary making a deal, and even though there are other teams involved, I still think most likely Markstrom will end up a Devil. At least out of all the teams available, to me, they make the most sense. As Friedman says, there's definitely something going on between Calgary and New Jersey on Jacob Markstrom. He added that Calgary is trying to keep things quiet and goes on to mention the Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators are also interested, and that is pretty big here. As Friedman continues to speculate about Toronto, he says the GM in Toronto is the guy who signed Markstrom in Calgary, and just on paper, a Markstrom-Woll combination is a pretty good combo. The other team that I think is in on the almost every goalie conversation is Ottawa. Now, I don't know how Markstrom feels about that, but I was told every conversation that involves a goalie, you have to have the Sens in it. Now, all of this really makes a ton of sense if you're talking about the fits, what Markstrom could potentially want to go to. I mean, he's a player as well that already signed in Calgary with a full no-move clause, so I don't think playing in Canada is the problem here. Again, Freeman talking about Calgary and New Jersey, that makes a ton of sense. Toronto is fascinating. I mean, if they were able to get Markstrom and Woll, that to me would be incredible. I am a pretty big fan of Joseph Woll, what he's proved so far in the playoff games he has played, but he's someone that is still quite a bit raw, and I don't think is ready for that full-time starter minutes right out of the gates. Having a player like Markstrom that can kind of ease him into it would be ideal there. But just like we saw with Boston, how they were able to go back and forth between Ullmark and Swayman and get the most out of each one, to me, that could be exactly what Toronto maybe looks to do this next time around and finally have goaltending as a true strength. But then you have Ottawa, and to me, it would be insane if we actually ended up seeing this happen, because I think it would have to take a lot for it to happen in the first place. You'd have to think that Calgary would have to bring in Joonas Korpisalo, which is a tough pill to swallow. If they end up doing that, though, and Markstrom ends up going to Ottawa the other way, to me, the price would be astronomical. I mean, we've already heard, and again, a little bit of a spoiler to what's coming up as we'll talk about next, the price is pretty insane for Calgary. But if they're going to bring in a contract like Korpisalo into the fold, they would have to bring in a ton of other assets to make it worth it. I think the sad reality for Ottawa is that even though Jacob Markstrom would be a ton of fun and could be exactly what they need, I think they've already hitched their wagon in the Joonas Korpisalo train. Considering the cap hit, the term, I just don't see any team, unless it's an insane offer going back, actually bringing him on. And to me, I think that's what kind of straps Ottawa and likely has them keeping Korpisalo as their starter for the foreseeable future. It's not ideal, but that's what I see happening. In saying that, though, we got a really interesting read here from Bruce Garrett talking about the fit of Markstrom and the Sens, and most importantly, what the Calgary Flames are actually wanting in a deal. Before this, we hadn't really known what the Flames are truly seeking, but in this article, we now know what they want. And here we go. This is the interesting one, because in that video, I mentioned the 10th overall pick by New Jersey being into play. And, you know, obviously there was heat for that. I mean, understandably so. I mean, on the outside, it feels like a lot to give up for a Jacob Markstrom type, but as they go on to say, the belief is that Devils general manager Tom Fitzgerald is willing to offer up his number 10 overall selection in the draft as part of a deal to acquire a goalie. Again, I think there would probably be maybe something going back New Jersey's way, or another pick on top of that, maybe that Calgary have to give up, but we now know the 10th overall pick is in play and the Devils are willing to give it up. Now, this is interesting, because if we know that they're willing to give it up and a deal hasn't been made yet, is it that the Devils haven't received another piece back that they'd want, or is 10th overall not good enough for the Flames? And here we go. This is apparently what the Calgary Flames actually want in a deal, saying a league executive said they believe the Flames would likely be looking for a package that would include a first-round pick and a high-end young prospect from the Senators in exchange for Markstrom. Now, here's the problem to me, is that we don't know yet if this is just the Flames asking price from the Senators, because that could be the thing. If they are trying to offload Korpisalo, if the Flames are bringing in a Korpisalo type to make this deal happen, then sure, a first-round pick and a high-end prospect for bringing in a disastrous contract, I could see that. If that's what the Devils, though, are having to give up to acquire Markstrom, though, if no real big cap moves coming back to Calgary, to me, that is insane. I mean, I love Markstrom. I think he is incredibly underrated, but a first-round pick and a top prospect is crazy. I mean, if that's actually the price that the Devils have to give up, would it be that 10th overall pick and a D prospect like Seamus Casey? I mean, that package would be insane. I mean, if you're able to get that for Calgary, especially with a goaltender that won't be your starter in the future, with Dustin Wolf already coming into the fold, if you're able to get 10th overall and Seamus Casey, that'd be the steal of the decade. Now, Garrett goes on to say that the Senators have the number 7 and 25th overall selections in the draft, so they'll have no issue moving that portion of the ask. The issue is that they don't have a lot of young players in their system and don't want to part with any that are currently on the roster. They want a lot in return, a league executive said. Now, interestingly, he says the difficulty for the Sens is Markstrom wants to go somewhere he can win a Stanley Cup, and Ottawa doesn't appear close to being in the position, and truthfully so. A lot of the pieces are in place, and he'd be a nice part of the puzzle, but getting a new goalie is just one of Staios' to-do list. To take on Markstrom's salary, the Senators would have to get a goaltender off the books. And it goes on to say for the last sentence here, a league executive believes the Senators would likely have to offer defenseman Jacob Chikrin, along with a first-round pick and another selection to acquire Ullmark. Even then, he has a modified no-trade clause and has 15 teams on it. So if that's not an example of just how crazy the value is for these top goaltenders this offseason, I don't know what does. But I don't know, the more I look at this sentence, the more I read it, the more it just feels feels like the Flames are just asking for a first-round pick and a high-end prospect just for Markstrom. I mean, it doesn't mention necessarily that Korpisalo would be a part of the deal. So the fact that Korpisalo would have to be a part of the deal, it would have to be even more on top of that, which again, just feels crazy to think about. Again, if we're talking about New Jersey, I think it would be Casey and maybe that 10th overall pick. For the Leafs, it would be the first-round pick they have, maybe even a top prospect like a Fraser Minton or something else on, maybe even more than that, maybe an Easton Cowan perhaps would have to go back to Calgary. I don't know. I mean, every time we talk about Markstrom's value, it seems like it just keeps going higher and higher. And hey, maybe they just want Connor McDavid by July. Who knows? But I don't know, man. If you're going to give up this insane offer for Jacob Markstrom, a goaltender that probably won't be all that good in just a couple of seasons' time, just go after Linus Ullmark or UC Saros. I mean, these guys just have so much more of a lifespan to them and so much more of an NHL career ahead of them that if you're going to give up these massive trade pieces, first-round picks, top prospects, just go after the guys you could actually sign long-term and have more than just a couple of seasons in them. Especially in UC Saros' case. I mean, obviously, we know the package going back to Nashville would have to be insane, especially for the Preds who aren't in a rush right now to get rid of him. I mean, even though Askarov is coming up, they don't have to move him like Justin Wolf would have to get playing time this next year. It's not that much of an urgency, but I do think in Nashville's case, of course, being able to listen and willing to listen, we know they want to put Askarov up full-time, or at least soon-ish have him as a main part of the roster. And it makes sense. But in Saros' case, he actually is deserving of that type of package with the youth, with how much he's performed, with how much he's consistently been a top goalie in this league. Even though there were some inconsistencies this year, he's still a top 5 goaltender to me, no doubt. With Markstrom, you might be able to make that case, but you have no idea if he's still going to be on that level next year. Obviously, goalies are voodoo, and Saros could start struggling out of nowhere, but Saros is a much better bet to be a long-term piece for you. And if you're going to give up all these assets and decimate your prospect pool, I know which one I'm choosing. If you told me a year ago that Markstrom would get a 10th overall pick back, 1-for-1 perhaps, without maybe even any retention involved, I mean, to me, that would have been an easy answer for Calgary to say yes and to make that deal happen. I just don't think they should overcomplicate this because they could end up regretting it. And again, this all comes back to the ages of Ullmark, of Saros, and how they compare things, because I feel like there is just inherently less of a rush to trade him, less of a rush to get rid of him. To me, I think Calgary should have some urgency here, especially with this draft, because it feels like with how much teams are willing to move their picks, this might be the best opportunity they ever get to get a top 10 pick or maybe even a first round pick. What's really the worst thing that could happen to Calgary if they just accepted the 10th overall pick straight up? Oh, you get Berkeley Cadden or a Cole Eisenman, or a D drops like a Zane Parekh or a Sam Dickinson, who, besides Wolf, ultimately becomes by far their best prospect in the pool. Oh no, that's such a bad thing to have. If the Flames end up continuing down this road of not having good enough offers and rejecting everything that comes by, Markstrom could just end up declining in value and ultimately not being worth much by the time they actually end up trading for him, and then just continuing the cycle where Calgary's in the mucky middle forever and not really going in the direction they should have. To me, they should be going completely rebuild. I understand why they don't want to go complete rebuild, but Markstrom is exactly the type of player that you could get massive value for, and they already did for a lot of their forwards, and they traded this last offseason. Markstrom is a key player to trade if Calgary is going to turn this tide and go in the right direction. And to me, it just has to happen. It just has to. I just really want the Calgary Flames to be good again. I want them to be on the better side of history. I want them to actually become a true contender. But to do that, you got to get top picks. You got to get in the best positions possible. And for me, for Calgary, that is pivotal to their success. If you're able to get a top 10 pick for Markstrom, just pull the trigger. But I'd love to know your thoughts down below on this whole Jacob Markstrom situation. What do you think of the potential suitors for him? Do you see another team rising from the ashes to trade for him? Or do you think it's more likely that a team like New Jersey, Toronto, or the Ottawa Senators end up making a deal happen? I would love to know your thoughts down below on that. And also, what do you guys think about the trade price? Do you think it's way too much for Markstrom? Would you end up paying for it? What do you guys see a Markstrom trade looking like in the end? I would love to know all your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you guys enjoyed. Always love bringing this content out for you guys. And when you guys do that, when you guys subscribe, you'll be able to see more of it just like this, so everybody is appreciated. And of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and especially all the Sens, Devils, Leafs fans, to see what they could end up trading for Markstrom in the end, potentially. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but every share is appreciated too. And click on this card for all of my trade content right in one digestible playlist right for y'all to enjoy. And I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one, y'all. Goodbye.